welcome Gabriella Hoffman, Senior Fellow for the Center for Energy and Conservation for the Independent Women's Forum, and Bryant Walker Smith, a professor at the University of South Carolina and a transportation law specialist. Good morning to you both.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Bryant, I know you're all in for the EPA's proposal. Gabriella, you say it's not a good idea, so let's start with you. Is this push towards EVs just green gobbledygook and governmental propaganda?
On the face of this proposed EPA rule, simply put, it's just a pipe dream divorced from reality. The EPA is even constitutionally limited as to what it can and cannot do. Under the West Virginia versus EPA ruling that was handed down last year, this is a pretty wide sweeping rule to be interpreted. Not only does it apply to the EPA, to elsewhere as well, but it said that the EPA under the major decisions clause cannot restructure total economies, especially the transportation industry, industries. And so forcing behaviors, you can't force consumers to buy electric vehicles. If we want this to proliferate, it has to be the private sector. It can't be the government gesturing to the private sector. You have to do this. And like you had mentioned, the poll shows that there's very little appetite among the public. Even a Gallup poll confirmed this, to proceed here. Enforcing behaviors is never good. And ultimately by 2050, if we're lucky, the government agency, the EIA, the Energy Information Administration, says at best only 9% of total vehicle fleet will be EV. So this is extremely impractical, very costly, and we'll discuss more.
Whether it's for cost or convenience or a lack of charging stations or just people are traditionalists and they like their old school cars. Clearly, Bryant, you can see how some would not want to jump on board with this and maybe even liken it to forced vaccination when we had those debates during the pandemic because people want freedom of choice. So why should we all get on board?
Who's saying that? I guess I'm a little confused. So this is a draft proposal that would not take effect until 2032. It does not speak directly to auto buyers or owners. It talks to the manufacturers of those vehicles and would propose that they would have to sell a more fuel-efficient fleet, which would result in far more of their vehicles being electric. That doesn't mean that anybody cannot own or keep or buy now or in the future a conventional gas vehicle. That's the simple facts of the plan. I actually am much more optimistic about our country. I think we're an optimistic country that thinks we can do things. And I think that involves giving people more choices, the opportunity to have more charging stations, the opportunity to have a wider choice of vehicles, perhaps to save money on fuel. This is the result, if enacted, of this proposed rule that would take effect, in 2032.
Well, let me just follow up with one question there, Bryant. In terms of auto dealers and manufacturers, if they are told by the EPA that they have to sell 2 out of 3 cars as electric vehicle cars after a very, very wild ride for them with the chip shortage, with the fact that people weren't leaving their houses, with the fact that they had to raise the prices of used cars to the point where nobody could negotiate on the lot. Is this fair to the automotive industry?
So this is a proposal for 2032. Nearly a decade in the future, and it would require automakers to achieve greater fuel efficiency than they do, and they could do that in a number of ways. Right? They could sell more electric vehicles. They could use a alternative fuel source. They could buy credits. There are a variety of mechanisms for auto manufacturers to comply. This is the next step in what has been a multi-decade process of the Environmental Protection Agency doing what Congress told it to do, which is to regulate our vehicles, to set goals for manufacturers in order to make our vehicles more fuel efficient, to make our world, frankly, more survivable, and to save people money on their energy.
I have one more question for you, Gabriella, because 2032 isn't that far away. I don't know about y'all, but time's going by really, really fast for me right now, and more as I get older. So that's like tomorrow. But the EPA projects the boost in EV sales would avoid nearly 10 billion tons of carbon emissions over the next 30 years. So is there a case for this actually helping our environment and making us better stewards of nature and our world?
I don't think so. When you look at the type of materials that are required of, scaling an EV fleet of this magnitude that they're proposing, it's impossible to do. They're not looking here at home. They've refused to approve mining operations in Minnesota and Alaska and other places, and they're going to be leaning largely on holdings largely from the CCP in China, which also obviously dominates 90% of processing as well, in addition to holding the majority of rare earth minerals. If people claim to be environmentalists, you can't rely on our adversaries, which are far worse polluters than us, if this were to be viable. And also, it's what goes into this as well with just the upkeep, the kind of inefficiencies with mileage, material procuring materials. The battery replacement almost can cost as much as a typical gas-powered car, a regular sedan. This is not environmentally friendly when you look at the grand scheme of things. It's going to be costlier. They say that you're going to save $12,000 across the lifetime of an EV. I'm better off having my Subaru Forester, gas-powered Subaru Forester, which I bought used a few years ago. I can get a newer model of my existing car for a fraction of what a typical EV costs. So right. I'm not sold on this being more environmentally friendly as a conservationist.
Thank you for watching. Go to newsnationnow.com to find NewsNation on your television provider. And don't forget to click the red subscribe button below to get more of NewsNation's fact-driven, unbiased coverage.